Hello, viewers. Welcome to BharatShakti.in. We're going to be taking on another episode of our series on Authors Speak. On this series, we have authors of various books coming on and discussing their books with us on screen. Today, we have a very wonderful book, China's Bloodies Bulletless Borders. I repeat, China Bloodies Bulletless Borders. The book has been written by Colonel Bhat. First, a little bit about Colonel Bhat. Colonel Bhat was initially commissioned in the Madras Regiment, and that was in 1972. By 1974, he had been transferred to Hudson's Horse. I know both this regiment, Hudson's Horse is also Madras Regiment, both very fine military units. And later on, he was inducted into the Public Relations Organization of the Ministry of Defense. Finally, he found himself in Delhi at its office, the PRO's office here in Delhi, and continued to function from here till he took his premature retirement. Welcome to BharatShakti.in, Colonel Bhat.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
Now, as much as I know, sir, about you, you are also a syndicated columnist, a commentator, author of a number of books, and editor of Wordsword Features, associate editor of Salute, and also a consultant, editorial consultant with South Asia Monitor. Well, it's very nice to have an erudite man like you with us. And today, of course, the discussion is whatever is the latest prize that you produced for all of us. China Bloodies Bloodless Borders. I'll go ahead with the first question that I have in mind.
Please.
My first question that I have in mind is, this is books in China are really a pretty much beaten track. A lot of people have traversed along that tracks. But yet, why did you take on China for your book as a subject? And how did you go about formulating your research, structuring the book? And I find some things that are very good. That is a few points of emphasis that you have gone about in very much more detail. How did you go about this whole project?
I appreciate your question that, there's so many books on China. What have I come out? What's so special with the book I've come out with? It's, I think, the first and foremost important aspect about this book is that it began with the then Sikkim brigade commander, late Brigadier MMS Bakshi, who was commanding the brigade in Sikkim in 1967. He happened to be a former commanding officer of Hudson's Horse, my regiment, and he was the CO of the regiment during the 1965 war. And anyway, it's essentially on meeting him, and my request that would he consider sharing the fact that I'm writing. He was quite open to sharing his experience about the 1967 skirmishes, and it was indeed eye opening the way things turned out and how the Chinese got very shocked and how well they wanted to use they used artillery. They crossed the normal limit of small arms fire by using artillery. For us to use artillery, we had to get the approval from the defense minister. The defense minister in those days was Mrs. Indira Gandhi herself, and she gave the request went through proper channel, and she gave the sanction. And anyway, the end result was that almost 400 PLA soldiers got killed. We lost about 88 in skirmishes that happened in Sikkim and in Nathula and Chola. This is just September, October, just a matter of 2-3 weeks. But this led the Chinese to press very hard that let's not fire at each other. Now, this is a point which seems to have got, sort of taken for granted or not being mentioned enough. That since 1967 till till 2020 and even 2020, whatever happened, it all happened without us firing at each other. After they killed 20 of our soldiers in Galwan, I thought we'd be firing at them, but we still didn't. And yet we caused tremendous damage to them, even barehanded. However, the one aspect of uniqueness about this book is bringing out, reminding the country that we've had to deal with a very troublesome enemy, a very devious enemy, without firing at him. And no,
Along with this,
and there are problems, and it doesn't, it's very hunky dory to say, oh, it's a very nice way to manage a border. No, not with an enemy like I refer to him specifically as enemy, not just adversary, because it's enemy status now after whatever has happened. They is a very troublesome enemy who keeps crawling into your territory almost every day, claiming and never wants to settle the boundary.
right? Would you also like to talk a little bit about the Sumdorong Chu incident, or maybe a little more in depth about Nathula, whichever way you want to go?
Oh yes. I think both need to be, even the services community and the country, they need to be reminded that in 1967 we thought let's try and get over this troublesome business of confrontations almost on a daily basis by having a barbed wire fencing. The barbed wire fencing is something the PLA would just not accept. Every time we picked up a pick or a shovel, we'd be fired at. And this, and with the divisional commander Major Sagat Singh was also very assertive on not wanting to shift, not wanting to in any way sort of shift or withdraw from any position that his division was holding and the Nathula brigade was holding. But it is how does one put it? It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy, and then came the stage where they raised up the ante with artillery fire, heavy mortars. We gave it back to them, and that ended the business of firing at each other. But it did not end the business of the PLA trying to grab Indian territory, even if it is disputed. That almost 4,000 kilometer long line of actual control, there is some demarcation of it, which they would keep changing the goalpost about almost on a daily basis. Now, Sumdorong Chu is an excellent example of our getting the better of them. They came in one place, we got it encircled, and the Battle of Wits carried on till what was proved was the hesitation of the PLA about getting into a firefight. That came out very clearly. And that came out very clearly in Doklam also. So this is a great way we devised of, managing a border, not by firing at each other, but with dhakka, mukka, wrestling, grappling,
Right.
all kinds of, and then finally they broke even those limits by you can say 2020, after releasing a deadly virus from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which
Right.
which contaminated the whole world. We'll discuss. But after that, they used iron rods, medieval means they used in May and June. And the only firing that happened was on the night of 6-7 September, when they tried to climb up to the Kailash range. And they were advised by Indian troops to go back. In sheer frustration, they fired for the first time in 53 years, but in the air.
Right, Col, but let's leave the warfare bit a little aside, and I've been talking about physical warfare a bit aside,
Okay.
and let's talk about this Wuhan virus, or essentially
Ah,
Chinese virus,
ah,
with the
ah.
Ukraine battle also going on. There's
Yes,
a lot of
yes, yes.
this has been somehow this is lost. This has been lost in the background. I would say Wuhan virus. You've done a lot of research on it. It's there in your book. How about telling us the story the way you feel it?
You see, my book was going to the publisher in 2019 with 5 chapters under the title Managing Bulletless Borders. And just then, the first news about COVID-19 came out. My first reaction to COVID-19 was that you can give it any name, but this is the result of China or the PLA and the Chinese authorities experimenting in biological warfare. This was I had no doubts that because this is something which one had been, delving into time and again. The nuclear uh, dimension is there already. We know what they're doing with Pakistan. Uh, and that is when I decided to add one more chapter. So I gave that chapter the time of that the time and title that after the Wuhan and Mamallapuram summits came the Wuhan crisis, the Wuhan virus. I refer to it as the Wuhan virus. I had no, hassles about doing so because it emanated with all the research that I did. What came to light was that in Wuhan there is a wet market in which all kinds of animals are sold, but not bats. And the first 14 cases of unusual pneumonia, it was from there that it came to be known to Chinese scientists who were working there that it came to be known that what this is not emanated. These 14 cases are not a result of food that they've eaten or animals that they've eaten from the wet market of Wuhan. It's from bats. So it's from the bats that this virus has been isolated and developed. The first scientist who came out with the fact that there's a leak. We know what happened to him. Barely a month later, he is supposed to have died of COVID. With the information or lack of information that China has within its iron curtain, nothing gets to be known. What was getting known was that telephone connections in Wuhan were going silent by the thousands. A lot of activity had shot up in, of cremations, of funerals. And I suppose the only things that came out were on somehow on social media or from be that as it may, whatever research one did, that one chapter got formed, and it came out in that chapter that they have been under the Chinese Communist Party, the People's Liberation Army, and scientists have been practicing biological warfare for decades. And whatever has happened, the leak that contaminated the world consists of 97 countries. Beyond 97, they call them territories. So at least 110 countries and territories got contaminated by COVID-19. And it is during this pandemic that India is one of the countries which was, on which a second aggression was launched. If you refer to 1962 as the first Chinese aggression in any case is a term that was coined by the government. That being the first, this was certainly a second, if not third. If you can, count on whatever happened in Sikkim in 1961, 67 was not aggression based. It was a result of firing at each other. However, there's enough that one brought out in that chapter, and the last 2 pages of that chapter are on the same Chinese and the same laboratory, Wuhan Institute of Virology, being involved in programs of establishing laboratories in Pakistan. This is something which came out barely about 3 weeks ago in a TV news network, and got commented upon also.
Right,
But it's something we have to be very, very wary about.
Right.
It's bad enough for China to be practicing biological warfare of the kind that it has been, but to involve Pakistan also, I mean, there's no dearth of all kinds of dangerous activity from Pakistan. Do you add this one to it, then you can imagine what our future would be.
Right, Colonel Bhat. Thank you. My last question to you, and if I can ask you to keep it a little short, the answer, and a little crisp.
Certainly.
Will you be extensively researched across China while producing this particular book? So, what are your thoughts on what does the next couple of years, what kind of a behavior can we expect from the Chinese?
We can expect all what they are best at: deviousness, deception, not following whatever is decided in talks or written agreements. They've stretched themselves right up till Arunachal. It's something that even they will feel the pinch of, because the Indian Army, Air Force, and even Navy, if it comes to, they've got no problems with altitudes, and the naval personnel also who operated at such altitudes.
Marcos.
I'm very few, but what I'm saying is Indian Army and Air Force, we don't have any. It's very tough, but it's something which we are very used to. They are not used to. The quality of weapons is not very good. They've got long production lines. They're very good at projecting. Oh, we are a very powerful country. The optics are great of their parades and their exercises. But we should not take that for granted. We must ensure that we are modernized. We have all the required weaponry that we need in appropriate measure, and most important, political will, a steadiness of political will in dealing with the Chinese. An example of which I think we should not repeat, something like vacating Kailash Range.
Right. Uh, Thank you, Col Bhat. I think that was a very fine talk that you gave on your book and the way you went about researching it. Uh, China's Bloodless Borders is definitely had an author who's done his job back home. Uh, Thank you, sir. Thank you for sparing the time for Bharat
Thank
Shakti.
you. Thank you.
Thank you, viewers. Thanks for logging on to bharatshakti.in. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel and like us on the channel. Thank you.